everyone, and welcome to episode 70 of the Medieval Podcast. I'm Danièle Cebulski, also known as the 5-Minute Medievalist. Can you believe that it's episode 70? Because I can't. 70 episodes of the Medieval Podcast, and I'm proud and happy to be part of this and to have you be part of this. So welcome to episode 70, where it's going to be story time with a little bit of background. So it's just going to be me today. I'm going to be reading you one of the fabliau. So let's get started. So the fabliau were stories that were told that were usually funny and short, and they had to do with all sorts of things. Most often, somebody was outwitting someone else. And I think of all of the fabliau, most often in those cases, it was people outsmarting a husband. So you can tell from this kind of plot structure that a lot of the fabliau have to do with some pretty racy topics, some pretty randy topics. If you were to read them in a true translation, you'll see that they have what one of my high school teachers called blue language. It's very explicit language, stuff that you wouldn't normally say in front of children these days when they're talking about the acts that people get up to together. They're very earthy tales. A lot of them are about relationships. A lot of them are about outwitting people, like I said before. And like I said, these are husbands that are usually being outwitted, and they are not very nice husbands. So the stock characters are a factor in fabliau. And the husbands are often really dumb or really cruel or both of them. So in a way, it's kind of like fables, which is probably where fabliau comes from, where there's a moral to the story. And the moral of the story is don't be so mean and awful that people feel good when you're tricked. So a lot of these tales are about adultery. And something I've said on the podcast a bunch of times is that adultery is not tolerated. It was not accepted in medieval Europe for the most part. You'll find exceptions that are very, very interesting. But on the whole, adultery was not accepted. It was a crime that could be tried and punished in the church courts, the ecclesiastical courts. But adultery made up a huge part of the stories that were told at the time, not only the fabliau, but also courtly love stories, which I'm going to talk about in a second. So as much as adultery is a great part of a story, in a lot of the fabliau, because everything is exaggerated, the husbands that are very, very cruel can also be very abusive in these stories. And in the Middle Ages, that was funny. When people were hurt or they were beat up and things like that, it was meant for humorous purposes. So a lot of the times women in these stories are trying to escape something, trying to escape the wrath of their husbands. And if they don't, then they are punished really, really brutally. And this is meant to be funny. But the kernel of truth in that is very uncomfortable for me and for a lot of modern people. So that is why I don't share those particular fabliau in my work. First of all, because I don't like them. They are uncomfortable in modern sense, and I can do what I want, so there. And also because I think that we don't need to kind of perpetuate these stories and keep telling these stories in a way that says, well, there's a horrible thing in it, but they're also hilarious. I'm not sure how much I appreciate having that. Well, I don't actually appreciate having those stories perpetuated in culture. So I will tell you that this is in the fabliau, and if you want to read those, go for it. Just be aware if you are a person that's sensitive to these kind of things. If you were to dive into some fabliau, you will come across it. That said, like I said, I'm not going to delve into that. It's not my jam. The fabliau that I'm going to read to you today is called The Ghost Knight, and this is a fabliau that kind of intersects a place between fabliau and courtly love literature. So this is about a story about a courtly love story, a knight that really wants to be the lover of a lady. So let's talk a little bit about courtly love literature. So the courtly love tradition is generally said to have started in France, in southern France, in the 12th century with the Dukes of Aquitaine. So Eleanor of Aquitaine's family, it really kind of started there with the stories of the troubadours. And courtly love has kind of some conventions to it that you see pretty much everywhere. And I think that, well, let's just take note of some of these conventions because they're going to be pretty familiar to you, I think. So the conventions of courtly love literature tend to be that there is a lady who's usually married. She's unattainable in terms of the marital sense. She's also not virgin, which is kind of an interesting thing. So a man who's interested in this married woman is not taking her virginity, which I think is which is significant. The man is usually a man who has great prowess, or he has to prove great prowess. He is very, very persistent, and the lady is very resistant, at least at the outset. The man has to do something that's extraordinary to prove his love. And this is something that's expected on both sides. So he expects he's going to have to do it. She expects he's going to have to do it. It's just what's done in courtly love literature. The man is meant to suffer for his love with the understanding that it's going to be worth it in the end. The woman is expected to relent in the end once the man has proven his love. So it's very transactional. It's very move and counter move. If the man proves himself worthy, then the woman, she needs to give him her love. And love it's the emotional sense, but it's definitely the physical sense. And I think that it's important to note these traditions in the courtly love literature because we see them in our romantic literature, in our romantic songs, in our romantic movies. We see the same thing over and over again. And it's worth noting because that transactional nature, it can have some pretty negative effects in our culture where, the man has to be very, very persistent. And if he's persistent enough, he's definitely going to get the girl and she's going to love him more for it. Now, I think that the stories we're starting to tell are starting to change, which is good. But pretty much every rom-com for the last countless years has followed that story where a man has to be very persistent and prove his love in some way, and he will get the girl and it will have been worth it in the end. I think that you see that kind of to an extreme in medieval literature. If you look at the story of Ulrich von Liechtenstein, who's not the same as the guy in The Knight's Tale, although he is named for that. Ulrich von Liechtenstein, if you look at him in the context of his original story, which may be sort of true and it may be completely false, we're not sure. He is actually a lunatic of a stalker, and he just goes well out of his way. He does the most ridiculous, masochistic things to get the lady's attention, and she keeps saying no to him, and he does not take no for an answer. And he's just so persistent, and he's working so hard, and it kind of puts the woman in the position from the audience point of view as being cold. Like, why is she not just relenting to him? But she doesn't. And honestly, if you read Ulrich von Liechtenstein's Service of Ladies, if you were the lady, you probably wouldn't really relent either. So these are sort of the courtly love elements that will be featured in this fabliau. The other thing I want to mention is it's really influenced by the tradition of chivalry. And I thought this is a good moment to talk about chivalry. People often talk about it in media as if it is like the 10 Commandments, like it came down from the clouds and everything was written on stone. Here's how to be a chivalrous knight. And chivalry is not like that. I remember watching that movie at Christmas time. What was it? The Night Before Christmas, I think. And he was saying, I follow the code of chivalry, as if it's something that you recite. But I went to Leeds not too long ago, and there was a whole panel on chivalry, and no one could agree on what chivalry was. It's a very nebulous thing. There are some conventions to it, as in a knight has to show a lot of prowess, he has to show mercy, he has to be good to ladies, but there isn't a specific code for it. The idea of courtly love feeds into that, but chivalry is not something that you can nail down. It's not like the 10 Commandments. So I thought I would mention that before we get into the Ghost Knight. So keep in mind that this is within the courtly love box that this author is writing, trying to make a funny story in the medieval sense, and also the traditional fabliau tricking people. So I hope you enjoy the Ghost Knight. Here we go. Without long delay, it behooves me to tell the adventure of a knight and lady which befell, so the book tells us, not long time since, in Normandy. This knight wished to make a certain lady his amie, And so great pain he suffered for her that she was certain he loved her, for he did all things he knew of that might please the lady. I do not wish to make long tale. This knight essayed so long that one day she questioned him and asked him on what account he required her love of her, since no day of his life had he wrought chivalry or prowess to please her and earn her love of her. And so she said, smiling and without anger, that he might never be lord of her love until she might know without doubt how he bore shield and lance, and if he knew how to be successful therein. Madame, if it does not irk thee, said the knight, grant me but that I undertake a tourney against thy husband, and let it be before his gate and in such a place that thou mayest see the whole tournament openly. Thou shalt see, if thou wilt, how lance and shield befit me. The dame gave permission to the knight without delay to undertake the tournament. He thanked her fairly, and straightway went about to perform it. And now it was decreed, and they asked and invited knights of valor to be there. Thus they sent forth throughout the country, nor did they cease until the set time, for they had good will of it. And they commended the hour and the day to the knights, who came in great numbers. And now the tournament was assembled, and it was great and proud and fierce, as any man might know who saw those knights put on their hauberks and lace their helms when the time came to joust. Each one was ready betimes. The two who had undertaken the tourney were the first in the place, all armed on swift steeds and ready to break lances. So they leaped up without delay. They joined shields, lowered lances, loosened their reins, and hurtled forward. Right nobly they trusted to their horses. They broke and shattered lances and spared themselves not at all. Each struck the other's heads as well as he might. The knight who had undertaken the tournament and sworn by his soul to the lady's husband that he would joust with him no matter what it cost, now left his side quicker than an arrow from a well-drawn bow. He bore him down with lifted lance, and neither harness nor single might hold him up. He fell down all of a heap. When the lady saw this mishap of her lord, she was sad on the one hand, but on the other, greatly pleased that her lover had done so well. Why should I make long debate? They had well commenced the tournament when harm and loss befell them, for a knight was killed. I cannot tell how or why he died, but all were sad and grieved at it, and they buried him underneath an elm. After that, the tournament was scattered, for it was late, and each man went to his hostel. The lady, without waiting longer, sent commandment to the knight by 2 pages that if he wished her to have him as her knight, he should come to speak to her that evening, else she would never hold him as her lover. He, who was right glad of that command, said that he would truly come. He would not let it be, though he were cut in pieces for it. And so the pages left him. When the night was come, it was late for him ere he might go where he was meant to be. A maid was watching for his coming. When he arrived, he saluted her. She led him into a chamber in great pain and fear. There she said he was to wait until the lady came to him. Then the maid departed and told her mistress tidings of the knight, and that he was in the room where he awaited. Dost thou say true? Yea, by my soul. And I shall go, said the lady, when my husband is abed. The knight was ill pleased that she was so long in coming, and he might not hold himself from falling prone asleep, for he was very weary by reason of the arms he had borne that day. And the dame, who was afeard because he had come so late, went into him soon. Then she saw that he was sleeping without doubt. She made no cry nor thrust, but straightway returned again. She called her maid. Go quickly, she said, without delay, and tell that knight from me that he is to depart with all speed. The maid asked her why and what the reason was. I shall tell thee the cause, said the lady. It is because he is asleep. By the Spirit of God, thou art wrong, said the maid, as it appears to me. Thou liest, girl, entirely, even though he had to wait the whole night for the kiss of a lady such as I. Therefore I am ill-pleased, for I know that if he loved me, he would not do so, though 100 pounds were given to him. Go and dismiss him now. Thereat the girl went back to the knight who was sleeping on his elbow. She went to him and gave him a thrust. He leaped up straightway to his feet. Welcome, lady, he said, thou hast tarried long. Thou salutest me in vain, sir knight, said the maid. Betimes thou wilt hear other tidings. My lady, who is lying beside her lord, hath sent me hither to command thee not to be so hardy nor so wilful that thou ever come into a place where she is. Alas, damsel, wherefore? Tell me why. I grant it thee. It is because thou shouldst not sleep in any place where thou art waiting upon so noble a dame, so fair and white and tender, and withal so worthy as my lady. Damsel, he said, by my soul I have misdone, it is true. But of thy charity I pray thee, if I have thy permission, that I may go where they are lying, my lady and her lord. For know that I have never had greater desire to do aught else. All this I grant thee, by my faith, said the maid. He was right happy at the news, hastened into the chamber without delay. He had no hindrance to delay him. There was a light in the chamber that was wont to burn there. The knight went straight unto the bed, and paused a little way from it, and drew his sword. The husband opened his eyes, and perceived him there. The knight did not move. Who art thou? He asked. The knight, who had no desire to tarry, answered him. I am, quoth he, the knight that was done to death today. Well must thou recall it. Well I know, and what brings thee here? Sir, I am in great pain, nor will my soul be free of it until this lady who lieth beside thee has pardoned me, if it please her, for a single misdeed I did when I was living. So may God in heaven give thee honor and joy, and enough of his good things, as thou prayest her to pardon me, for I have told thee the reason and cause of my coming here. Dame, dame, said the lord, if thou hast any anger or displeasure or ill will towards this knight, pardon him, I pray thee. I shall not, said the lady. Thou troublest thy head in vain, for this is but a phantom or some such creature that deceiveth us by night. Certes, it is not, I believe. I will not do it, sir, without doubt. I promise the knight so, by Lord God and his mother. By the faith that thou owest St. Peter, said the Lord, whence comes this anger and ill will the lady harbours towards thee? Sir, in no wise will I ever tell of it, said the knight, for if I have ill of it now, I should have worse if I said a word of it. Surely then it will be pardoned thee, sir knight, said the lady. I will distress thee no longer. I cry thee mercy, my sweet friend, for more I do not ask of thee. Then he departed straightway. Well had he turned the matter, but if he had not wrought it so, he had never recovered the love that he had newly found. Pierre d'Enfant, who made this and told this fable first, did it but for the instruction of those who may speak of it if they encounter such adventure, for none hears it that doth not amend, if ill deed do not too greatly surmount it. So there we go, the ghost knight, the knight who shows up and pretends to be a ghost just to get the forgiveness of his lady for falling asleep. In this story, you see the woman has pretty impossible expectations for her knight, which is something that is very, very common in fabliau. But he expects it. He's like, yeah, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have fallen asleep, even if I was super, super tired. It's my fault. I need to have your forgiveness. And sure enough, showing up as a ghost, he gets her forgiveness right in front of her husband. I did forget to mention it earlier, but this translation is from Medieval Narrative, a book of translations, and it's translated by Margaret Schlock.
Before we go, here's Peter from Medievalistnet to tell us what's on the website. What's going on, Peter?
Hey. Well, the big news from the last week was a Turkish court decision on Hagia Sophia, which is transferring the museum status from a museum back to a mosque. So we had a lot of coverage over that over the weekend, including a piece by Alice Sullivan looking at the past, present, and future of Hagia Sophia. So that's well worth checking out. Also, take a look at Benat Alort's latest column. He does medieval Scandinavia for us, and this week he was looking at the rise and fall of medieval Denmark.
Wow, that sounds awesome. Thanks, Peter.
Thanks.
Thank you to all of our patrons on patreon.com for keeping this podcast going. As you know, we always have sweet deals on Medieval Warfare Magazine, the Medieval Magazine, and our book club. And I wanted to take a second to tell you about our book club book for this month, which is Formal Combats in the 14th Century by Stephen Malberger. And I really like this book. I mean, the 14th century is my favorite century, but it's really interesting to see how the culture of chivalry affects things like how people perform when it comes to honor. What are the rules surrounding things like formal combat? So when people are fighting to prove a point of honor. So how does this work? And this is a really great book that I wanted to make sure I took a second to stop and tell you about, because I really liked it, and I hope you really like it as well. So if you're interested, go to patreon.com and join into our book club, and you will get this book as soon as the month is over. If you love the podcast and you don't have a lot of money, that's okay. If you'd like, you can contribute $1 as well. I appreciate every single amount that is given to our Patreon, because that's what allows me to do the work that I love. So thank you. You can find everything you need to know at patreon.com/medievalists. For everything from fabliau to courtly love literature, and when they cross over as well, follow Medievalistnet on Facebook or Twitter at Medievalists. You can also follow me, Danièle Cebulski, on social media at 5MIN Medievalist or 5-Minute Medievalist. You can find my books, including my latest one, Life in Medieval Europe, Fact and Fiction, at all your favorite bookstores. Our music is Beyond the Warriors by Guy Frog. Thanks for listening. Have yourself an awesome day.